Hey guys, I'm Amber and my co-host here is Kelly. Welcome to the Brown Girls Guide podcast where we discuss everything we wish we knew growing up.
Hi guys, if you missed our last episode where we chatted to a doctor guest, Nicole, about sex periods, health matters and more, do go have a listen. It's packed with resources for young women who may need some advice or guidance in this regard.
Yes, it was a very informative episode where we really wanted to give as much information as possible to anyone needing some health advice or help. So this week we are taking a break from interviews and we are going to unpack, probably rant actually, about something more serious and something that's been on our mind lately or always. And as a person of color or as people of color, it's always on our mind. But before we get into the serious business, as always, we're discussing these over a glass or mug of something to drink. So Kelly, what are you having today?
Today, Amber, I was considering having maybe like a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, but then I don't know, the day happened, and now I'm
Yeah, the
having
day.
the day happened, and now I'm having a Bacardi Breezer. Is it a Bacardi Breezer?
Bacardi, please.
What
Well, taking it back. Taking
what
it
is the
back.
other spritzer or the other side with a B?
Panini?
No.
Brutal
Anyway,
fruit?
it's a brutal fruit. Thank you.
Ah.
Okay. Today I'm having a brutal fruit ruby apple cider. I think that's what it's called.
Oh, that's my favorite brutal fruit.
Or an apple spritzer or something like that. And it's actually really delicious. I'm really enjoying it. Yeah. So like even though it's a little bit cold today, this is actually going down really well. What are you drinking?
I'm having a glass of red wine. Surprise, surprise. I feel like I have this every week, but I'm having a glass of Pinotage, the false bay one. Guys, if you haven't had it, please just go buy a bottle. I think it's so good. So that's what I'm having tonight.
And please tell us if you buy a bottle so that like Amber will feel like her
Like an
choices are
influencer.
like she's influenced people.
Yes, but
Uh,
okay, so let's just dive right into it. So today we are discussing privilege. So yes, white privilege, of course, but also other forms of social privilege, whether it be male privilege, white privilege, education privilege, etc. So we are going to try to unpack and discuss as much as possible because these are the types of things we didn't really know much about growing up. Well, at least I didn't know much about it. Kelly, was this a concept you knew about growing up?
Not at all, to be honest. I'm not saying that it didn't exist, but I don't think it was a named thing at the time. I don't think we really knew how to identify it, to be honest. And
Yeah,
I guess we also have to understand that when we were younger, or at least for me, we were like fresh out of apartheid. So there was
yeah.
a lot that our parents had to deal with in that regard. And it's only now with the younger generation that we are more aware of things like privilege. And I think it is also a result of apartheid, which
Mm.
is why we're only really experiencing it now or actually like naming it now.
Yeah, for sure. And for those who aren't 100% sure about what privilege is, at least in like the social context, it's when people have easy access to resources and things based on their race, gender, beliefs, background, and more. It's when they have access to these things and they have very few obstacles that stand in their way of it. What it does not mean is that they are rich or well off. It simply means that there are fewer obstacles standing in their way than many others. So, for example, having access to a car to get to a job interview is a privilege, even if it's a cheap car. There is most likely someone else on their way to the same job interview who has to wake up way early at like 5 a.m. to make use of sometimes very unreliable public transportation
Mm.
in the hope that they can get to that interview on time. So, I think it's clear which person in that instance is the privileged one.
Exactly. And thank you for making it clear that being privileged doesn't equate to being rich. I hate that argument of, oh,
Oh.
well, we grew up just barely making it from the month to month. So please tell me how we are privileged. No, Blake, or
Yeah.
whatever your name is. That's not what we are saying. You grew up in a house with running water and electricity and access to a decent education where classrooms aren't like 50 kids in one room. So please just check your privilege. I'm just going to be honest here and say that many, not all white people are very sensitive when it comes to
Hmm.
talking about
Not
privilege.
all. I'm joking.
And so many get defensive when the topic comes up. But in a country like ours with so much inequality, we really, really need to have more of these conversations. And we need our white peers to listen to us when we have it.
Yes, and I agree that we definitely need to have more of these conversations because way too many privileged groups like white people and straight men are so coddled to this day. And many people, me not excluded, are scared of just calling people out on it because we don't want to make a situation awkward or we don't want to be picked on for it later. And I always find it funny though how you mentioned that white people's comeback is always that when you talk about privilege, like just because we call out that you're privileged doesn't mean like we're taking away from any other struggle to be able to face in life. Like nobody goes through life smooth sailing. And it makes me think of last year this time when we're all like deeply in lockdown.
Yeah.
And like the celebs like the Kardashians and the Jenners were trying to be like so relatable during COVID and all these captions saying that we're in this together. Like, no, bitch, we are not actually in this together.
No, we are not. And I actually remember that. I remember J-Lo posting a picture of herself and A-Rod. May that relationship rest in peace. I remember posting a picture of herself and A-Rod and their kids isolating in their ridiculously large yard by the pool. And like, don't get me wrong, I love me some J-Lo, but that was definitely a check your privilege moment for sure. Like even for me as a colored woman, I know that I have social privilege to some degree. I know that if a black man and I walked into Constantia village, like separately, guess which one of us the old tannies are going to look at weirdly.
Exactly.
So, I mean, if I can identify my privilege, why can't other people who are so clearly a lot more privileged than I am? In case anyone needs a few more examples, let's just rattle some off here, hey? Amber, you go for it. You start.
Okay, yes, this is what I'm ready for. So I'm going to start off with like my favorite type of privilege to roast, and that is male privilege. And one of the biggest things that gets to me is how men, for the most part, like straight men, can go through life just so nonchalantly. Like little to no regard is given to things we die over every day. I went on a date with this guy recently. I hope he's not listening. Probably not. Oh my God. And we were going to a place close to where I live, and it was 8 o'clock at night, so obviously it was dark. And he just very casually asked, like, why aren't we walking there instead of Ubering? And I told him because I could die. Like, what do you mean?
Exactly.
Men don't have to live with the constant anxiety of just existing as a woman in South Africa. And we can't even leave our houses for anything without having our guard all the way up.
Hard relate on that, by the way. Like sometimes I just want to go out for a run or walk around the fucking block. And I don't because I'm like, well, what if I die?
Literally, what if you die?
And then I see a guy like running on his own with his phone in his hand and like he's just so casual about it. And I think that must be nice. It's just so annoying. And on some level, like straight people also need to realize that there is a certain amount of privilege we have just because we are attracted to the opposite sex. We never have to think twice about loading a couple photo to Instagram or talking about our partners, whereas gay couples like constantly have a battle going on inside where they're wondering how much of themselves and their lives they can actually share on social media or in a social setting.
Exactly. And now that you're talking about it, it's actually a good time to mention that making so-called gay jokes are not harmless and they are not without very real and very violent consequences for queer people. And I don't know if you've noticed, Kelly, in the news cycle, there's been a slew of like brutal hate crimes since the beginning of the year that just make me sick. And it all stems from this toxic culture that we have. One thing we can all start keeping in mind is just calling that shit out when you see it. I know it's hard and you have to just start somewhere. And as much as rape jokes are not jokes, neither are jokes about queer people. It's not funny. You are not being quirky and we are not being too sensitive. People are literally dying, which actually, now that I think about it, makes me think about an interesting point. When someone tells you that you have offended them, you need to listen.
Yes.
Just because you are coming from a place of privilege and you haven't experienced those microaggressions before, it does not make the person's experience any less valid at all. So it's the responsibility of those with more privilege, in this case, like us being straight people. It's our responsibility to elevate marginalized people's voices, and you have to advocate for them. So just don't try and dismiss it with your own rationale of, oh, I've also struggled, I've also been through things.
Exactly. And yes, please, like do speak up for people. Like that is actually a way that you can use your privilege, is that you can speak up when you hear other people make shitty jokes about marginalized groups. We are two brown girls that are talking about privilege, but what's really needed is that those with more privilege than us use their voices, resources, and privilege to help those who are not. Also, if you're wondering about whether you are privileged or not, you probably are. because those who are not know it without question. So you're wondering how to use your privilege in a good way, right? I'm glad you asked. I can hear you ask. Well, firstly, really just identify your privilege and accept it. And stop telling people you're not when you are. It just pisses others off, to be honest. Then speak up for those without privilege, as we said, or bring them into your conversations. If you see someone who needs a seat at the table, invite them to sit down. If you
Yep.
know someone who would benefit from you, like putting in like a good word for them, like with your boss or with your supervisor or whatever, then do it. There really are like so many ways in which you could use your privilege for good.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the most important thing to do is to use whatever privilege you have for good. Like, we don't have much as, colored women, but the bit we do have, we have to use it for good. Be an ally, listen to people, and for the love of God, I hate when this happens. Don't take up space where someone who's less privileged than you could use that time to make their voice heard. And I see it happen often, and I'm not going to name, obviously, the person's name, but especially in the queer space, there have been like recent so-called allies, being part of not being part of the gay community, but like standing up for them, but then kind of, being a bit loud and not leaving the space open for actual queer people to speak. So just also keep that in mind. Like, yes, use your voice, create that space, but don't take all of it up.
I must just mention that there was a trend in Hollywood, like it was pre-pandemic. I'm hoping it's still the same now, where let's say there was like a big blockbuster movie and there was a male lead and a female lead, or maybe it was a female. I think it was actually a female lead who started it. There was a female lead and there was a white female lead, and there was a black female also as a lead role, and the white female attached her, not her worth, like her value or her commitment to the black female. So she basically said, I will happily do this movie at X amount if the black female lead is also getting the same paycheck that I'm getting.
Yes. Wasn't this with Octavia Spencer and
I want to say
what's
yes.
this woman's name?
I don't know why I'm thinking of Jessica Chastain. But
yes, it is her. It is her.
Okay,
it is
okay.
Her.
Yes.
I was seeing her face, but I just couldn't get to the name, but it's definitely her.
Okay.
She is amazing.
And I thought that
a proper ally.
Like, that is such a great way to use your privilege for good. And before we end off, I just want to reiterate like what you said earlier, Amber. By calling people out on their privilege, we are not saying that your life was without struggles or strife. We are just saying that under certain circumstances and in certain social settings, you have an advantage and fewer obstacles based purely on the color of your skin, your gender, your sexual preference, your religion, and other factors. Just please be aware of it and use it for good.
Yes, I could not have said that better. And, on that note, like you said, it's probably best to just end this here because I will go all night and I haven't even had a full glass of wine. So as always, if you would like to get in touch with us, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Brown Girls Guide Pod and on Twitter at BGG Pod. So thank you so much for listening again. And until next week, bye.
Bye.